Okay, thank you for tuning into the stamp along video. We're going to stamp this scene right here. It's a very basic one, but we do throw in a little bit of a twist at the end with the white pigment ink, okay? So let me talk to you about the different things you'll be needing in this video. We have the Lakeside Cove Lg stamp right here. We have the Reeds Lg right here, and just this overhanging tree limb right here. If you have nature set number 8, you can substitute oak branch just fine in here, or if you have different cattails or something like that, or some reeds, you know, from nature set number 9, I think it is, you can use those ones. If you only have oak branch and don't have any reeds, then use your oak branch stamp down here as bushes or something like that. But kind of try to focus in more so on the concepts of this lesson when you get into it. It's more about the ink application, the retention of the lighter areas when you start applying your inks, and doing some shadow development, okay? And then we'll go into some of those little touches with the white pigment ink that I think really kind of sets this one apart from just stamping and coloring. It kind of moves into kind of a more emotional type of statement, you know, when you have this kind of foggy look in here, okay? So you have those 3 stamps like that. Now, I'm going to be using the Memento inks in here. I'm trying to remember what I already used, but I also use Distress. Okay, you can basically go with about 3 values of blue. Okay, if you have them. If you don't have them, substitute. You don't have to have these brands either. I mean, on this one right here, I don't even have a pad. I just put some ink onto my applicator, which is just a paper towel. That's all I'm using in this scene, is just a paper towel, and it's the same paper towel. I just wad it up one time and it kind of creates my applicator, okay? So you can use whatever brands in there that you want, okay? But they're dye-based inks. These are water-based inks. This is a 1/4 page piece of cardstock, okay? And it's matte cardstock. A lot of times I'll do these things on glossy, but I know people have matte. Not everyone has glossy. So I did it on matte, but if you have glossy and you want to do this on glossy, you can certainly do it on glossy. So mix and match, substitute, make do, okay? And just kind of follow along in the concepts more than anything, okay? When I'm doing this, as I'll mention in the video, I smear my impressions a little bit. I didn't really care though, because it's all about the ink application and in the end result. You know, I could still see my little smears in there, but they don't bother me. Plus, it's all about the lessons. If you are worried about kind of smearing, you can always heat set your impressions before you start bringing in the tone. Okay? So anyways, if you follow along with this video, I hope you have a good time. And as I say at the end of the video, if you have any problems, email me a file and, you know, we'll take a look and see what can be done, or maybe what happened in your scene, okay? So anyways, hope you have a good time. Grab your supplies and get ready to go. I move at a very slow, you know, regulated pace. So if you need to press the pause button, go ahead and do so. Okay, welcome to Stampscaping 101. This is a stamp along video where we're going to go over some really basic techniques and in a very basic composition, all right? We're going to be basing this one around Lakeside Cove Lg, because a lot of people have nature set number 8 that this one comes in. And I'll show you some of the very basics on how you can use these stamps, and we'll use some of the techniques that I've gone over recently in a couple of the videos based on ink applications, okay? Now I'm going to be doing this one in dye-based inks. You can use whatever brand you have, okay? These are some of the most basics of all inks out there. There's ones by numerous different companies, and all those companies have various lines within their range of inks, so you can just choose whatever you want. I stamped my Lakeside Cove out in a black, and one of the things I'm doing is I'm going over it with the green. Now if you don't have a pen like this, you don't have to color them up like this. I'm just going for a little bit of extra color in the trees and reflection, but sometimes it just comes out looking black, so you can also just use all black on it, and that would be fine. Alright, now on this Lakeside Cove, it has these dots down here, okay? Now, if I have this going off the bottom of my page, I just leave them all in there. But if I stamp this higher up, I'll show you where my card is. I'm going to stamp this one dead center, okay? So it'd be about like this. This is the quarter page matte cardstock, okay? And I'll just stamp it right in the middle somewhere. It doesn't have to be perfectly centered, you know, left and right, top to bottom. But I didn't color in this area down here, okay? Because I didn't want to have a really strong, definitive line. And I am standing up to get my impression here. There's a lot of surface area on a lot of my stamps because there's a lot of detail in the stamps. So when you're talking about kind of a distribution of the pressure that you're using on a stamp, you want to isolate it. I usually go left, middle, right, top, bottom, and I just make sure that that ink has transferred. There could be little things like on your table, even, you know, small things, sand or something like that, or glitter or something like that, that can kind of cause a ridge. And when we're talking about large stamps like this, you know, something like that can make a difference. Okay, so we got our stamp stamped out like that. This is a lighter than I'm normally used to because I'm usually stamping on glossy, but we'll get into that. I just figured for this first kind of stamp along in this, a lot of you have matte, or just about everyone has matte. Not everyone has glossy, so I thought we'd start off with this. Okay, now I can see a little bit of that green in there, but not very much. So I'm just going to stamp this in black, and what I've done is I've re-inked this from about here to here, and this is going to go over this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to overlap between about 1/8 of an inch to about 1/4 inch, okay? Even if I don't see this, you know, I can kind of tell that I'm going over it, so there's a big tolerance, okay, that you can overlap something with. I don't want to overlap 3 inches or something like that, but, you know, something like between here and here. So there's a pretty wide area there. You can overlap 1/16 of an inch, you know, but to 1/4 inch or so. But see how that just merges together right there? You don't have to do any kind of masking. Now, just figure out the part that you're going to ink up for this side. All right. Okay, and you're going to do the same thing over here. Just overlap. Okay, and we have our complete cove from edge to edge, and it's just using this stamp right here. You can do, you know, a 10-inch, you know, long Lakeside Cove, and you can just stamp this one repeatedly. You can do it a little bit higher, a little bit lower. You know, when you stamp it a little bit lower, it would look like this part of the rocks are closer to us, and then if I stamp this one a little bit higher, it would look like it's, you know, farther back in the distance. So you can vary it. It doesn't have to be all on the same exact plane. Okay, you can kind of alter it a little bit. Okay, so we have our main scene stamped out. Okay. Now what I'm going to do now, we can start coloring it in, but one of the things that I usually like to do is I usually like to lay down some colors and then stamp out my other imagery in here, okay? You can do it either way. You can stamp out all your imagery first, your entire composition, birds in the sky, a fisherman down below, foreground overhanging tree limbs, you know, cattails, whatever. You can do that right now, but I usually like to wait until kind of I'm a little bit farther along, if not completely through the coloring process. I just like to see where the things get to before I start adding those things in, but there's not a set way that you have to do it, okay? Okay, now, there's all kinds of different inks out there. If I didn't mention that already, in dye-based ink forms, there's Mementos, there's Marvys. I use Ranger Distress inks. These are water-based inks. And you can utilize these in the the composition that we're doing today. Doesn't matter really which ones they are, okay? The application process might feel a little bit different, depending on what brand you're using. For example, the Distress inks and the Mementos are a little bit thicker in viscosity than something like the Marvy pads. The Marvys typically are, they're thinner inks, they're very saturated, and they absorb into the paper faster, okay? So sometimes the blending process feels a little bit differently because they're soaking in faster. I'm just going to use a paper towel here because, again, it's one of those things that I know everyone has. If they don't have a paper towel, they probably have napkins at home, or if you don't have napkins, then you might have some sort of rag that you can use, okay? One of my favorite tools is the stylus tool. It has this fun sponge tip right here. It's a very ergonomic tool to color my pieces with, but let's just go with something that's a household item and easy to access, okay? Alright, so let's start adding in some blue tones. We're going to go through a range of light, medium, and dark, okay? So you can mix and match. Now see, I have this tumbled glass right here, Ranger one. Let's say I didn't have a summer sky. Well, you can use something like this then, okay? I typically like to start light, and then I work into my darker tones. If I don't have any light blue, then maybe I can use a medium blue or something like that. Alright, I just ink it up. If I only had that color of ink right there, I can just apply some of it and get that form of ink, okay? So see how much drier and lighter it is, so I can utilize that one. Okay, now, in some of my previous videos, in terms of ink application techniques, we're going to utilize some of those, okay? So I'm going to have those a little bit higher in the playlist of Stampscapes U, Stampscapes University. And we're going to apply some of it now. We'll go for kind of this color transition, going from dark to light, okay? Coming in from both sides, and then we'll go for those kind of narrower bands of ink applications, okay? So just to reiterate, we kind of start on the outside edge like that, and look at this transition right here, okay? See how that transition goes like that? We're going to apply that onto our paper like this, okay? Now these are dye-based inks, so you don't need to worry about blue showing up in front of black, okay? I'll show you that right now. And I'm pulling a little bit of my black. It's smearing it a little bit because it hasn't dried completely. Don't worry about that. Think about this in terms of your concepts. And if you are worried about that and it bothers you, you can heat set your scene before you start taking in some inks over the top of it. But what I want you to do is I want you to really focus in on your concepts here, okay? And getting this kind of ink application down. Don't worry about your pieces kind of being suitable for the Museum of Modern Art right now, okay? Kind of get down this process right now. And I am really dragging out some of that ink right there and really smearing it around a bit. But, see that right there? How it's kind of dragging that. I'm not even going to worry about that, though. Okay, so here's what's happening here. Every time I re-ink this, I'm starting on the perimeter like this and taking it in like that, okay? And then when I get inward like that, it gets drier and it gets lighter like that, and that interior area is going to be lighter, okay? So it's kind of like the source of light is this kind of this little horizon glow type of thing, okay? Okay, so on one of my previous videos, hopefully you took a look at that one. I have this thing going like this. I was showing how to get that kind of that streak like that going, where it tapers off. Okay, and that's what really looks really good in the skies like this. See this little kind of wispy. Kind of cloud formations. I don't know, it's vapor, I guess you can say. See that right there? See how good that looks? Just to kind of take it across like that, and then you can take it across like that. Try not to fill in this area in here though, okay? Now, the things that you've done up there, take it down here, and take some of it into your rocks, okay? See, watch this. So I can kind of color those rocks, and I'm going with a very light touch right here. Now I've got those rocks kind of tinted, right? But here's the thing, maybe leave some of those rocks a little bit light so it looks like the top side of them are catching light. So see, here's how I do this. Let me see if I can kind of show you. See, this is where I've kind of left some of those rocks in the background light. It looks like they look more dimensional that way, right? So you kind of color the bottom side of them like this down here, okay? And you leave the top sides a little bit lighter, okay? So it gives them dimension. Now, what I like to do is I like to come in my water like this and watch these streaks, okay? The way you get that streak is you kind of stay in one area and drag it across like that repeatedly, okay? Until it's achieved. You don't go like this. You just kind of stay in one area, okay? So this right here, just kind of repeat your motion, and this line is getting longer and longer. See this right here? Just keep it a nice, easy process. I'm not pressing hard either. Look, that's my paper towel. It'll fray over time, but after, I don't know, 150 swipes so far on this card, it still looks pretty good. That just comes to show you the pressure that I'm using, or pressure I'm not using on it, or maybe, you know, more accurately said. Okay, so I'm putting a lot of this color down in my shadows like this. And see where I'm going to start right here with this one? I'm going to come across like this, and come across really lightly. I'm using light pressure, okay? And I'm just kind of, when I get drier on here, I'm kind of dragging longer, okay? If this is the first time you've done it before, don't get frustrated. One of the things that people do is they get kind of one little streak down, and because they can see it, they stop there. I would say use more. See, like up here, this is looking pretty full, but I'm going to go a few more times just to kind of moisten that area of the paper a little bit more, okay? And that's for the reason of getting the pulp a little bit more saturated so that our other tones of inks, you know, our darker ones, will be easier to apply. Okay, now, I'm using the Memento right here. Just keep going. I'm going to use some of my tumbled glass here. You might have the pad of that, or another one of the Ranger blues. I just have the Reinker for tumbled glass, okay? And I'm going to put a couple drops right there on my paper towel, okay? So I'll show you how you can use Reinkers as well. Instead of dabbing into a pad, you just put a couple drops like that. And let's take a look at how that looks right here on our paper. Every time you re-ink, okay, or put a couple drops like that, start on the outside edge like that. You see that right there? It's a little bit darker. I could have started off with that one too, okay? It's almost like you're finger painting, okay? Just kind of spread it out like that. Hitting the shadows here, it's getting a little bit darker. And tumbled glass is a very light color, so if you can get darker using the existing color that you're working with, use more of it, okay? When you know to move to the next color is just when it won't get any darker using the existing color that you're working with. You know, because you can put on 50 layers of this, it'll look the same as the, you know, 10th layer or something like that. Okay, so I put a couple more drops on there. The Reinkers really spread out nicely because there's a lot of ink on our applicator like that. So I often recommend to people that they just kind of go with the Reinker fluid on their stylus tool or whatever their application tool might be. Okay, putting a little bit more in these rocks. You know, this is not a narrow thing. You can kind of configure it a little bit more, you know, into a narrow one like that. But if you have Copic markers or alcohol markers too, you can kind of hit the, you know, the more finer, detailed, kind of narrow areas too with something like that, you know, where something wider like this wouldn't be conducive for that fine detail. Okay, so let's go to our next color blue. This one's a Bahama blue. It's kind of a medium blue. Distressings have things like mermaid, lagoon, broken china. Okay, whatever you want. If you have the Marvies, the number 10 blue would look fantastic right here. All right, every time you change colors, I'm keeping my same applicator right here, and see how much brighter this one is now. It's quite a bit brighter than this side. All right. Kind of do the same thing, but here's what you do. You don't go in quite as far as you did with the previous ink, okay? So, this one right here, that's done right there. Hitting this in the shadows a little bit. Kind of down here in the water. The water kind of acts like a mirror for the sky, what's going on in the sky. Okay, and that's it. Let's try the Danube blue. It's kind of a little bit more of a navy blue. Now remember, if I'm using the same applicator too, when I dip into that color, it's going to be some combination of this color that I'm dipping into, plus all the colors that are already in this paper towel too. So you're getting some kind of mix and incarnation of it. Okay, so kind of getting a little bit more perimeter oriented. Remember that video on ink applications, you kind of use a little bit less of the darker tones, unless you're doing it completely like nighttime sky or something. Now watch this. See, I'm getting these fingerprints on here because this area out here is getting really saturated with ink, so it's kind of hovering on the surface there, which isn't a bad thing because it makes the inks easier to blend when it's kind of moist up there. You just kind of have to watch it a little bit as far as fingerprints go. Okay. You see that little kind of, that little narrow strip like that. It's coming in this way, and this way it's kind of like this. All right? You see this little streak right in here. Kind of goes like that. That's that streaking video, ink application video technique. So yeah, I kind of went right in there, and I'm utilizing the drier version of this as well. Okay, I think that looks good. I'm not taking it so dark on this one. A lot of times I go all the way to black and add more tone. If you want to take it a little bit darker, you can. But I think I will just leave it at that. Okay, and I think that makes a pretty good lighting statement within the piece. We have our shadows in there. Like I said, here's those little things. I mean, if you have some markers like this, you can go in and color in some of these areas in here if you want to, get in those shadows a little bit more. The bottom half of the rocks can get colored with a really light blue in this case. If this is a sunset and you had that warm light reflecting off the rocks, then you could do a different color. You can do a yellow or a red or I don't know, whatever. These are really light tones right here, so I'm just going in here and you can put some of this color into your water as well, like that. This is really, really quite subtle. It's practically a blending pen. But anyways, I think you can get the idea, I mean, you're not, it doesn't have to be, or well, you're using alcohol inks to color that, or alcohol, dye-based inks. You can use both. You're just kind of going on the concept of lighting and having, in this case, a light source and the reflected light down there. Okay, now let's grab your other types of foreground stamps, okay? One of my favorites is the reeds, large like that. You can go with smaller reeds, you can go with cattails, you can go with larger pine trees like this. You can put this down in the foreground like this, so that it'd be kind of a repetition of form, by having some larger trees in here and smaller trees in the background. There's the stamp that comes with nature set number 8 in the rocks and reeds. I can do something like this on each side flanking it. It would be a very bold foreground like this, okay? It's whatever you want to do. I don't want to obscure everything across the background, so I'm not going to stamp, for these trees, just stamped across that entire scene that I took, this amount of time to render. But let's just keep it simple. I'm just going to go with some of the reeds down here. Okay. I'm just stamping it in the Marvy black. A better black would be something like the Versafine. It's really, really dark, and it would really push the depth of the scene by having something so dark in the foreground. The Marvy black right here is a really good black too, but stamping it over the top of all these inks that are still moist, all of that ink doesn't transfer, so it looks more like a 95% gray or something like that. But here's what I did with the reeds. I just stamped it like this, re-inked it again, stamped it a little bit like this, and down here. And then I came back and, with a couple other impressions, just kind of filled it out a little bit more. Okay, now here's the thing that's going to be really fun. In addition to all the stamping and coloring, okay? This is one of the things I really love doing. And this is also why we've retained some of the white in here. If you got rid of all your white and it's blue in there and there's no white, don't do this part of it, Not that that's a bad thing to do, but what I'm going to do with this white pigment ink is I'm going to represent fog in here, okay? And if we have this white fog in here, we're saying that there is some white light in the scene. So if you've kind of shaded it all out where it's much more dim, you wouldn't have this kind of bright reflective light in the form of white pigment ink in here, okay? But let me show you what we can do here to really, I think, kind of put this scene kind of over the top a little bit more than what it is right now, okay? So we have some time of day during the lake. Now let's make this lake a little bit foggy. Now I'm hoping that my impressions down here are adequately dry, but if they aren't, then I'll be smudging them a little bit, but that's okay. Watch out for these reeds down here. I'm going to try not to touch them because I know they're a little bit damp. I see my finger can go right here. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to dab into this. Now, all of your cotton balls are going to be super juicy with too much pigment ink, I think. So what you do is you kind of dab it off quite a bit, okay? And then when you start taking it in here, start in your lighter area where, when you do it, I can barely see it because I'm doing white and white, okay? But then, slowly, I'm going to take it over some of those images where dark meets light. In other words, where that image meets light, and those images were stamped out in black and green, if you use some of the green, otherwise they're just black on yours. But see what, see if I can grab this. I'm putting this over some of these trees right here, okay? See right over here? So that's the same black as down here, but I put a little bit of pigment ink right in there. Doesn't it look like the light is hitting that area? And I'm gonna put it over these background trees here, the more distant trees, okay? About like so, okay? I like putting it down in my water as well, but doesn't it look like those trees in the background are pushed back farther now by having them lighter like that? I like to have this kind of mist kind of rising off of my water. Now remember, you don't want a big blob on here, so you really want to have your cotton ball almost where it's completely dry of this, okay? That's kind of a weird technique there, and that's not going to be something that we're used to doing. We're not used to dry brushing something in, but that's the technique that you're going to be using so that you don't get a big blob of ink, and then so you have complete control over your application of it. See that right there? I've kind of toned that out, so instead of it looking this sharp right here or over here, it's kind of in this foggy haze, and that's what gives this piece a little bit more atmosphere, okay? If you're doing this on glossy paper, it applies a little bit differently. On the matte paper, it applies a little bit quicker because the paper has some tooth to it. Okay, I'm putting this, I'm getting more familiar. I'm putting it over some trees. I'm getting the feel for what how it's affecting the scene. Okay, I'm coming in here from upside down because I can see where those reeds are this way. Okay, see this where I'm putting this right along this edge of the water, and look how cool that looks in terms of kind of an atmospheric fog. Here, I'll show it to you. But see what that does right in here? It illuminated that area too, didn't it? And that's why that area was left kind of the white down there. So we can get that kind of those atmospherics going. Now if you took and you colored in everything in your background, that's fine. You can always just, you know, rewind and do this again, but leave a little bit of white in these areas, and that's where you can apply some of that pigmenting, and it looks very natural in terms of that haze. But isn't that a lot more atmosphere down there, just with a few taps of that white pigmenting? And it's really so much fun as a process to kind of watch things develop really slowly and carefully, okay? It's not precarious, though, because I don't have a lot on here. So it's not like I go like this and, oh my god, I ruined the piece. You know, I mean, I did that. Don't do that on your scene, but you can. And it doesn't even show up, you know? It's only through kind of repetition that it begins to show, and that's what you want. Okay? I'll try to make those ones the distant really light, okay? So it really pushes them back in the distance visually. Alright, so there you have it. For a stamp along, I would go darker up here, you know, in terms of a finished piece, and if you want to, you can have some overhanging tree limbs for some extra depth, okay? Well, let's just do that here. If you have like an oak branch that came in your nature set number 8, that would be a great one. Here's the leaf stamp. I just kind of pulled this out of my supplies. Was it yesterday? I think it was yesterday, yeah. Can't even remember. I think this looks okay up here, just as is, but I'll show you what some kind of extra imagery can do. It can kind of frame the scene off a little bit more. We framed it off in the bottom with those reeds, and I think that looks great. And I'm just using certain portions of this because I don't want to cover up, you know, all of my, you know, Lakeside Cove and everything good that's happening with that. Okay, see that right there? I mean, this is unbalanced. Do it on both sides. Gotta take a look and see which way the leaves are hanging, okay? And I'll put this one right over here, like so. The VersaFine would look really good in here, but let's just stay with the dye-based things to keep things really basic. Okay, so anyways, here's the overhanging tree limb like so. Kind of frames things off a little bit more, doesn't it, from a visual standpoint, and visual and compositional standpoint. But there you go. What was it, 3 different versions of blue? The darkest blue barely shows in here. But we can kind of count that white pigmenting as almost like a separate color, because whatever we apply it to, it makes the colors that are underneath it lighter. So it alters kind of the end result. I mean, these right here were stamped in black and super dark green. They were almost like black, though, you know, to begin with. But look at the variation between these trees and these trees over here that were colored in the same color. You put that back there, and doesn't it look like there's more depth and lighting in the scene along with that little mist down there? So I don't know, a lot of you have, you know, we have white pigment ink in our collections a lot of times, okay? So I'd really recommend giving that a try and doing it again with a very dry touch, okay? Don't go like this and then get a huge amount of it and just like tap, 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 and then blob, you know, blah, 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 blah. You really have to take out quite a bit. So, you know, just inherently when you get that on there, just take a real little bit especially if your pad is kind of new, or even if it's old, but you haven't used it a lot, there's probably going to be a lot of ink in there, so use less than you think you need. Everyone uses too much to begin with. You really want to go... Here, let me show you how much ink is on here, okay? Okay, that's 10 taps right there. Fairly hard, okay? Now watch me do 10 taps here. See, there's barely anything on there. See? But there's that kind of haze there. Watch one tap. Like almost nothing. See that right there? It's only through that repetitive type of application that it starts to appear, and that's where you have a lot of control. Okay, so anyways, stamp along. Number whatever it was, I don't know whatever it was, but it's kind of the first scene in our Stampscapes University. And again, this, looks pretty good on it's on matte cardstock too, okay? Kind of has that satiny finish by the time you kind of layer certain, amounts of ink on there. But like I said, you can also do this in glossy, so. Alright, if you have any questions, drop me a note in the comment section, or if you have any problems with them, email me at stampscapes@gmail.com, and I'll take a look and see what we can do in terms of troubleshooting and whatnot. And you remember, I did smear all these trees in here, but I don't know. I'm not... I mean, I can see it, that drag mark in here, but when you take a look at it like this, I mean, it doesn't really matter, does it? And just think about the concepts when you're doing these stamp-alongs, too. If you get something, if you drop a stamp like that, don't worry about it. The thing that's important here is trying to establish this kind of lighting in here, the image blending, and the, I don't know, there's different saturated tones and the shadows and things like that in here. So see it as just kind of like an exercise, okay? If you're a musician, it's like doing scales or something like that. Okay, thanks for watching.